everyone. I have a big enough mouth to not need a microphone. I want to welcome everyone. I'm Elizabeth Rose, and I'm hoping that everyone got our fabulous directory. If you did not, they are at either door, so please look through them. A lot of love went into them. Yay! Dr. Karen Hall has one. And also a program, so if you have not gotten that, we'll be walking around with those as well, just, look for them. And without further ado, Dr. Carrie Hoffman, President, co-founder of the National Education Alliance for Borderline Personality Disorder.
Good morning? Yeah. Okay. Good morning and welcome, and it's so nice to see just about every seat filled. So I'm only going to talk for a very few minutes because we have such a wonderful day here today, but I do want to let you know that this is truly a room of riches. The resources in this room are incredible, and I want to start out also by thanking all those people that made this conference possible, which is Elizabeth Rose, Carolyn Landon, Karen Hall, and Christina McGee, who is the instrumental person behind that wonderful directory. What you're going to hear today is from the man who took DBT out of Seattle. So when we think sort of about a chain analysis, and in DBT we think about that in terms of problematic behaviors, well, we can look at it also from a very positive perspective, and that's what I want you to think about. So Charlie, in the late 80s, went out to Seattle and met Marcia for the first time, and that was the beginning of DBT leaving that state. And I was fortunate enough to be working with Charlie on the unit where he said, I think we need to bring this to the East Coast, and started on an inpatient unit. And so from there, we did that, and Charlie then encouraged me to think about using DBT skills with families. So we were the first sort of unit or any person to start applying those DBT skills to families, because DBT can work for everybody. And from there, then I was fortunate enough to meet some wonderful family members and start NEA-BPD. And from there, then we met new family members like the Halls, who really have put Houston on the map for borderline personality disorder. And then with Karen Hall, and so all of this is just snowballed, and that's a positive chain reaction. So before I introduce the first speaker, I do want to let you know about our very important, fairly new initiative, which is our GAP initiative, and you'll see it up on this slide. This is something that was started by NEA-BPD in 2014, where we wanted to begin to coalesce key leading people in the world, really, on recognizing that borderline personality disorder does exist under 18, and Salome will be talking more about that. But this is the initiative that we started back in 2014, and really with the energy of Andrew Chainett and Carla Sharp and Karen Hall and NEA-BPD, we now have a letter that's in the Lancet that should come out in the next month or two, which really does stake the territory about this global alliance. So this is what this alliance will do, and you can just quickly look at these sort of the goals that we've set, some of them of which we've accomplished, some of them which we hope to move forward on. But our goal is to have regional conferences where we have local professionals and family members and people in recovery talking about the need to recognize BPD under the age of 18. So we hope that you'll support this initiative, and if you see that there's a conference and it's in your area, we had one last year in Houston, but we're having many more across the country. We hope you'll encourage other people to go and sort of join this effort that we do need to recognize this disorder. It doesn't start at 18, it starts much younger than that. So it's my pleasure now to introduce Salome to come up and talk a little bit about the myths about diagnosing BPD under 18. So thank you.
Hi, thank you, Perry. So as Perry said, I am a student, a clinical psychology student at the University of Houston. I work with Dr. Carla Sharp doing research on the early identification and development of borderline personality disorder. So my talk is going to be about early identification. I'm going to present a few commonly held beliefs about BPD in youth, and then show empirical studies that debunk these beliefs. Okay, so research has shown that borderline personality disorder is often underdiagnosed among teenagers. So a few studies that have surveyed clinicians who were practicing for at least 10 years found that while between 60 and 80% of clinicians agreed that BPD was a valid diagnosis for teenagers, only between 10 to 20% of those clinicians reported actually using the diagnosis in their practice. In the first study shown on the slide, a large sample of clinicians were asked to choose an adolescent client who they had been seeing in their practice, and were asked to complete a set of assessment measures on BPD for that teenager. So based on these standardized symptom counts, 75% of the teens actually met criteria for the disorder, while only 28% actually were given the diagnosis by their clinician. So this suggests that there may be some reluctance to diagnose an adolescent with BPD among practicing clinicians. So can you move to the next slide? So these 5 myths have been identified as common beliefs that clinicians and people hold as to why BPD shouldn't be diagnosed in teenagers. So the first myth is that diagnostic manuals don't actually allow the diagnosis of BPD or any personality disorder before the age of 18. One survey found that 25% of clinicians held that belief. So in the next slide, actually the DSM and the ICD both have allowed for a diagnosis of BPD in teenagers for about 30 years now. Also, international treatment guidelines that have been published recommend the use of the diagnosis among teens who meet criteria. And the actual criteria for BPD are the same for adolescents as they are for adults. So the second myth on the next slide is that BPD features just represent normal adolescent behavior. So this belief was held by about 40% of clinicians who were surveyed in one study. And so this myth makes sense. On the next slide, you can see that 20 to 30% of teenagers report some impulsive behavior. So drinking, binge drinking, driving under the influence, binge eating, physical fights, shoplifting, self-harm, and suicidality. Also, affective instability is a hallmark feature of adolescence because of developmental changes that are happening in the brain. However, 80% of teenagers don't report engaging in these behaviors on a regular basis, whereas teenagers who have BPD are experiencing much more persistent and severe forms of these behaviors. So a way that our lab, people in our lab tried to address this question is by conducting a series of diagnostic interviews for borderline personality disorder to teenagers. And so what they did is they had a group of teenagers who were patients who met diagnostic criteria for BPD, another group of patients of teenagers who didn't meet criteria, and then teenagers with no psychopathology at all. And they transcribed these interviews and looked at them for qualitative differences across teens based on a diagnosis. So on the next slide, there's an excerpt from an interview with a teenager who met criteria for BPD. And when asked, do you ever feel like you don't have an identity, she said, I feel a little bit like I have no identity sometimes, yeah. I feel like I often, when I first meet people, I only act like a chunk of who I am. I don't know how to do it, and it becomes really confusing, enough to really know which me is really me. So why is it confusing? Because I feel sometimes like a blank canvas a little bit, but sometimes I feel like a lot of the time I find myself doing with my actions or with my words, kind of making it so that it's not maybe what would be the best for me, but more like what would be the most dramatic. So what we found for this criterion in particular, the responses from teenagers who had a diagnosis of BPD they were really different in terms of the chronicity of the identity disturbance that they were experiencing. They also more frequently moved between feeling good about themselves to feeling bad about themselves, and they had a much higher level of confusion about themselves. So to compare, I have an excerpt from a teen who was a patient, so had severe psychopathology, but didn't actually meet criteria for BPD. So when she was asked whether she was unsure about what kind of person she was, she said, well, sometimes I think I'm not really sure how to act around other people because I'm a shy person, but I don't want to be a shy person, so sometimes I try to change it up and I get confused whether I'm really friendly and outgoing or nice or if I'm really just a shy person. So there's a bit of a difference in terms of kind of where the behaviors come from and having a source of identity to guide people's experiences. So based on the study, across all criterion, we found that there were notable differences in how teens described these different symptoms. And across all criteria, people who had BPD, they tended to have more severe distress associated with their behaviors, more frequent and more severe behaviors. So the next slide, the third myth is that symptoms of BPD can be better explained by the traditional axis 1 disorders. So this myth makes sense also because BPD is associated with high comorbidity of other disorders. So upwards of 50% of teenagers who have a diagnosis of BPD will also meet criteria for at least one other traditional axis 1 disorder. So on the next slide, the way that this belief can be studied empirically is with factor analytic methods. And so what these methods do is they try to account for the shared features across disorders by extracting some common factor. So what these models typically show is that when you put in different disorders or symptom levels or symptom counts of disorders, as you can see on the right-hand side with the rectangles, common factors are extracted. So these ovals with factors are on the left-hand side of the model. And these factors account for comorbidity across multiple disorders. And they represent shared liability to experience distress in some specific way. And so these models often show that there is an internalizing factor that represents a liability to experience distress inwardly, as is seen in anxiety and depression. And there's an externalizing factor that is a liability to experience distress outwardly, so what you see with substance use or antisocial behavior. And when you add BPD into that model, what you find is that it's not completely subsumed under these one or the other shared factors. So it actually represents something that shares associations with both internalizing and externalizing. So there is something unique about BPD that can't be accounted for by comorbidity with other disorders. So in the next slide, you see that the fourth myth about adolescent BPD is that because personality is still developing during this age, it's actually too unstable to warrant a diagnosis. And so on the next slide, so the source of that misbelief is that on average, level of BPD symptoms or the prevalence of BPD in the general population actually starts to decrease after young adulthood. So it peaks during adolescence or late adolescence. But what these figures don't show when looking at just the kind of mean level of symptoms in the population is the actual high levels of rank order stability of a borderline personality disorder across the lifespan. So what that means is that if you rank order a group of people in terms of their level of BPD symptoms, people who are at the top remain at the top. So relative to their peers, they're always going to have a higher level of symptoms from adolescence into adulthood. Also, what's important to note from these studies that look at the trajectory of symptoms is that adolescence is actually a really crucial time to intervene because it represents the highest risk for developing the disorder. So on the next slide, the final myth of BPD is that this diagnosis is going to be particularly stigmatizing for young people because it's actually difficult to treat and resistant to treatment. And on the next slide, actually this myth has been debunked by multiple treatment studies that have found that manualized treatment protocols such as DBT and mentalization-based treatment are very effective in reducing BPD symptoms. And in a study that we're working on in our lab, we're looking at the effect of an inpatient hospitalization on BPD symptoms. So we looked at parent-reported symptoms, which is the upper line on the graph, and child-reported symptoms, which are the bottom line. And the horizontal dotted line is a cutoff, clinical cutoff for these different measures. And so what we found is that during the course of about six-week inpatient hospitalization, levels of BPD symptoms actually decreased to below clinical levels. Then between T2 and T5 on the graph, which covered an 18-month span after discharge from the hospital, symptoms continued to decline. So even after they were out of kind of severe or intense treatment, levels continued to decline. So it's very hopeful to know that these symptoms can be addressed by treatment, and therefore they should be addressed by treatment. So on the next slide, isn't it more stigmatizing to deny that adolescents have a disorder, especially when this denial may actually limit a person from seeking and receiving appropriate treatment that are effective? So on the next slide, basically, while it might seem obvious to you who are here at this conference that adolescence is a valid time to diagnose BPD, these are really important facts to disseminate because continued ignorance about adolescent BPD is actually a barrier for adolescents to getting services that they need. And it's also a barrier to supporting continued research that is needed to further improve access to services and to improve the appropriateness of these services for teens. And from this initial research that has shown that BPD is as valid a diagnosis in adolescence as it is in adulthood, on the next slide, there are some exciting advances. So as Perry mentioned, GAP, which was established in 2014, has called for action to promote the early detection and timely intervention for youth with BPD. So GAP has outlined specific clinical and research priorities to address their goals, as well as social policy strategies and recommendations. Other exciting work has focused on improving the diagnostic specificity of BPD for youth. And so most of the work that we've done in BPD, and also a lot of the measures that we use to diagnose BPD, are downward extensions from work that was done with adults. And so sometimes we find that these measures don't account for some of the developmental specificities of adolescent BPD. And so there are efforts to improve our measures so that we can have a more accurate identification of youth. And the last kind of exciting avenue for clinical work is the idea of applying a clinical staging model to the treatment of BPD in the same way that we do with cancer treatment. So this can be described as indicated prevention, where individuals can be identified as being at different stages of a disorder. So this may be just having a risk for developing the disorder later in life, or it may be a prodromal case of the disorder. And from there, we can identify services that are best suited for that stage of the disorder. So for somebody who may just be at risk, a course like Family Connections may transform the family dynamics that set the individual up to not develop a full case of BPD and further not any more severe than they already have. So this program is being utilized by Dr. Andrew Channon at the Origin Youth Health Program. And so hopefully it will lead to more expanded clinical options for teens and families. So thank you for listening. And I know that my slides aren't available in the program, but if you have any questions about the studies that I presented, you can email me and I'm happy to send them to you. Thank you for having me. Dr. Swenson is next.
All right. There's a big advantage in getting to introduce yourself in the details, though Perry already started it. But then I'm going to tell you a story. It's the real introduction that no one would have ever given. Uh-oh. Well, it'd be cool to wear this kind of shirt, but there's no way. They're disadvantaged. Okay. You probably have to adjust the sound a little bit. Is there? Got it? All right. Everybody hear me all right? Okay. Good. Is it that? So I just want to say, well, let's first get this. You think it's this problem? Too many. Let's see. Is that going to work now? Or is that a little bit of a hum? You think it's the others? All right. See, it's not only people that have high sensitivity. But you know, it is true. People are exquisitely sensitive. I wasn't going to say that or talk about that, but one of the things I've been thinking about in my work is how almost everybody knows everything. I mean, seriously, like what I mean is, you can give me a million examples of how that's not true, but it's just when you're sitting across from somebody. I was supervising someone this week that wondered, should I tell the patient such and such? And I said, 95% chance the patient already knows. And it was true. I mean, people know things. 3-year-olds know things. They still remember things, when at that age. I want to thank, you heard from Perry about we started. I was just sitting next to her and I leaned over and I said, isn't this amazing? I mean, when I first saw Marcia Linehan, about 1987 or 88, and then came back and wanted to put DBT somewhere in my work, because I was running a psychoanalytic program for people with borderline personality disorder in a hospital. And I felt that in the years I did that, as good as I thought we were at the time, I did notice, and had lots of reasons to notice, that no matter how well we understood them or thought we understood them or tried to help them understand themselves, they still were not making certain changes. They didn't know what to do if they were really mad. And we weren't teaching them what to do when you're angry. We would do some line at the hospital of trying to get them to put it into words and take it into therapy. But then I started thinking, what do I do if I'm really over the top angry? That's not what I do. I punch something, I yell, I take a walk, there's a million things. And I started to think, in every domain of life, we were not giving the patients in a way, the credit that if only they knew what to do, they'd probably do it. It wasn't all internal conflict. And so just thought, then I heard about Linehan's work. I went out there, then I came back. I wanted to put this in place somewhere. My psychoanalytic unit, the staff wanted to have nothing of it. They thought it would contaminate our treatment there. So my boss said, do you want to run a different unit? So I took over a different unit. I ran both units, and one psychoanalytic and then one developing DBT. And it so happened that the senior social worker on the unit I went to was Perry Hoffman. And at that time, I'm sure I have this distorted, but it seemed like the main thing she was doing, other than her regular work, was psychoeducation for families of schizophrenia, and doing like weekend workshop and stuff. And so, but she just sort of shifted gears. She just let go of that, and she just jumped into working with borderline personality disorder and has obviously not stopped. So I've been very lucky to know Perry, and she does things very quietly, but she never stops moving the ball forward. It's just incredible. You just would never know. But it's hard to drop one thing and pick up another. I don't know how many of you are actually from Houston, but I was excited to be coming to the city where James Harden is, because I'm a basketball fan. And this is a man who over the past year has had to drop his identity in a basketball team where he was a superstar shooter, scoring, and being a most valuable player and a scorer from the wing, And then with the new, sort of a turnaround and a new coach and stuff, all of a sudden he's told he's going to be the point guard. Point guards, except for Magic Johnson, were never huge scorers. Oscar Robertson, go back a little more. And then this guy turns into, like, he's the leader of assists in the league, and he's still scoring about nearly 30 points a game. It's like, oh my God. So I went on the internet to figure out, what did this man do? This is unbelievable. It's an amazing story. Really, because when you get used to playing one game for a long time, like I played psychoanalysis for a long time, to shift to a different game, all the little details of that you never see, but it's a huge change. And he made the change, and he's like a superstar point guard now, and it has taken the Houston Rockets up the league. So that's amazing what Perry jumped to that, and then how I jumped to psychoanalysis, and how you guys, I'm sure every one of you has made similar jumps in your lives. And so I'm very happy to be able to do things with Perry at this point. It's like a gift come true that we can, even at this point, we're both, just historic people, because it's a nice way to say it. And so we're doing this amazing stuff. And then to come here and not having known these people, I've known a few people a little bit, but I went to a dinner last night with the Healing Hearts of Family people that have organized this for years and stuff. And it's just, this is an organization that centers around a heart. And it just was so moving to me last night to hear a certain story and just to talk with people. And, I've had my own scrapes as a dad, and I've been to Al-Anon meetings, and I've done various things, and I just felt immediately like at home when people start just talking about, yeah, my son this, my daughter that, and yeah, we as a family. And to see what people are doing, because as Marsha Linehan has said many times when I've taught with her, usually when people face terrible situations in their lives, either it breaks them or it makes them stronger. And what makes them stronger is what the resources in this room that you mentioned. One of the resources in this room would be, how many people here probably know your own story of how you have coped with adversity. And if you've come through it stronger, you have a message if you can get it out. So I'm just privileged to be here with Karen Hall, doing, this thing, and seeing now you and some of your people here, and Christina, who's been helping me stay on track in the last few hours, and very helpfully, and Elizabeth Rose, who's really helped me getting here and arranging things. So thank you very much, and thank you all for coming out and being here. I want to tell a quick story, background that's not part of my formal resume, but it captures why I find DBT so useful. And then we'll launch into teaching formally. But when I was a little kid, like maybe 8 years old, 7, 8, 9, and I'd be in my gym class, and we'd have to stand at one end of the gym in a line and then run to the other end. I was a very slow runner. I was often nearly last getting across the floor, even though I've always been a little tall for my age and at that point. And the only reason I wasn't dead last is, thank God for her, was Carolyn Sparkman, who was even slower than me. And I remember her and treasure her for this. Really helped me out. I don't know if she did it on purpose. She was just empathic, or if she really couldn't run very fast. But now, I don't think it was a huge problem for her, and it wouldn't be a huge problem for a lot of people, but it was a huge problem for me, because I'd say from about 8 or 9 until about 16, my only goal, my passion and my dream, was that I played basketball. Year-round, I played basketball. I played basketball on teams year-round. I had a gym right next to my house at a school. I'd be the first guy there and the last guy to leave. I was a gym rat, and and I was just really, that was my thing. And I loved it, and I really had my eye on who were the great basketball players that I could be like. And in the earlier days, it was Larry Bird, because he was white. I knew that was something I probably wasn't going to change. And he wasn't especially fast compared to other NBA players. And he was a great shooter, and I fancied myself that, and a smart player, I fancied myself that. He's not that smart in some other ways. He's been a good a general manager of a team, but he wrote a book about an autobiography that actually somebody else ghost wrote. And every third sentence is like almost the same thing. He just keeps going back to saying, no doubt about that. Then you say, you know, my brother was a better basketball player than me. No doubt about that, you know. And then when I got to college and I just didn't know if I wanted to be at that school, I thought about changing it to other school, and I thought, you know, I may be throwing away stuff, no doubt about that. But, you know, and it just goes, it's just like I thought, somebody published this. But his basketball intelligence was beyond belief. And that's what I cared more about. And so he was, but then by the time I was a little older, I was looking at Bill Bradley, and he was my hero, because he was even a little bit slower than Larry Bird, and he was an amazing player, and he was smart and became a Rhodes Scholar, and then a senator and stuff. So I thought, okay, I like that one. But the problem of being that slow, it just wasn't going away. By the time I went to I was in junior high, I was a good player, but I was slow and I couldn't jump very high. So my dad, I lived in Oregon where I grew up, and my dad took me to the University of Oregon track coach on a Saturday to consult to me about my running. He gave me a regimen by the end of the day to run. For the next year I did that. I was up early in the morning every day. Next to this school they had a track. I would run 440s. I would hop a 440 on one foot, hop a 440 on another foot, hop a 440 on both feet, and then run wind sprints. And then at night, 1 hour of jumping rope. And so I did that for a year. And my legs got really strong, but I didn't get much faster. I was like, there's a difference between speed and muscle mass in the legs. And I just didn't seem to have those junctions that you need. And of course, no one in my family did. And my parents denied it, but they were both slow. And so, and I was increasingly upset about this, because I was still like a top player on my team, but I could see high school coming, and I saw other kids starting to develop physically in getting faster and stronger and stuff. Got into high school, and by the time I was a sophomore in high school, I was on the bench at the varsity, not seeing many minutes. And then I was a junior, and I was still on the bench. And at that time, I was smart enough to look ahead and figure out the math and the pyramid of how basketball works and how many guys get in the NBA, and it was devastating. So fast forward when I'm in my psychoanalysis, when I'm in my psychiatric training and then psychoanalysis, and I'm talking to my analyst, and I said, gee, Dr. Katz, my dream was crushed when I was 16. I'm still trying to recover. From that, I did move on, and I became a good golfer after that, which doesn't require the same speed, though actually it sort of does in some ways in your body in general. But I was a pretty good golfer, and I became a good student. But I was still running. I'd go out to the track and run around the track, and it just became a lifelong habit. So I say this to my analyst, I said, you know, and I'm a really slow runner still now. And he says, but what makes you think you're so slow? And I said, I don't think I'm slow. I'm slow. I think I'm slow because I'm slow. And, I don't even want to tell you my times for the 100 and the 440 and the mile. I mean, it's just ridiculous. No athlete in history has had these times, So he says, then there's a pause. He's sitting behind me, like I'm lying on the couch. I used to see him at 6:15 in the morning in New Haven, Connecticut, and I'm lying there, and then he says, after a pause, but what makes you think you're so slow? And I thought, why is he asking this again? Like, did he not get it? And I said, Dr. Katz, I said I'm slow because I am slow. Okay, I'll tell you my times for the 100, for the 440. I said, not that that would mean anything to you. You're kind of short. You're a little bit round. You've probably never seen a field of athletics. So I started to rip at him, and tell him, of course he doesn't understand. And then I said, but I am just slow. Let's just leave it at that. And then he says, but what makes you think you're so slow? Then I thought, we've got a problem on our hands here. Is he trying to torture me? Did he just have a stroke? And he's like, he just keeps repeating. It's like this perseveration thing, and he just keeps going. And then I just said, I don't want to talk about this anymore. And I cut it off and went to something else. Meanwhile, at my usual daily going to the track and running, there's this guy there who's a 200s and 220s, 440s and stuff. And he's probably a college student or he looked like a graduate student. He was a little older than that, but I didn't see this guy. This guy really knows how to run. So at this moment of all times, I go to him and I say, hey, would you take a look at me running and see if you have any suggestions that would make me any faster? And he said, sure. So he looks at me running. And this guy turned out to be a perfect match for me at that moment. He was like, he really took me under his wing. He had a lot of suggestions. Very specific suggestions that I never got when I was back at the University of Oregon track coach. I mean, this guy, he would say to me very specific things, like I'd be running, and I sort of would run, I was tall and stuff, and he said, okay, you're a tall runner with long legs, so you've got to lean forward while you run. You've got to lean so far forward if you want to go fast that you almost feel like if you don't run, you're going to fall down. So you got to get down and lean forward and run like this, because the way you're running, you look like you're like a tall goose who's sort of on a sort of a la thing in the park, just going around and looking around. So he said the second thing is you can't look around if you're going to be a fast runner. In the Olympics, you don't see the guy getting to the 100-yard and he's looking to see things. It's like, no, it's like, so he said, you've got to have your eyes focused ahead of you on the track, and like a horse with blinders, have nothing else in your mind. And what's going on in your mind is very important. Like, you've really got to think, I'm fast, and keep moving like that. Lean forward, and you've got to take short, choppy steps. You're a tall guy, you're used to taking long steps. You're going to have to cut them in half, and you're going to have to feel like this is ridiculously short, but do them fast, and your arms pumping. So he's showing me these things. I think, wow, this is very specific, helpful skills training that I'm getting here, and I'm running faster. And over the next 3 months, I put this into my running, and 3 months later, I actually moved so dramatically faster in some of these times. Like it went in the 440, it had been like in the 90-second range, and now it's down to the 66-second range. In the mile, it had been in the 8-minute-ish, 7.5-minute-ish range. I ran a 5:35 mile. And so it's like, how did I do this? And it's real. All these numbers are real. I look back and I think, did I make this stuff up? No, this happened. And what I was left with, that was the most profound training for my psychiatric psychotherapy career. Because what I learned was, you can have an incredibly stubborn problem that looks like it has no chance to get better, but it can get better. And what made it better was the combination of these two people. The psychoanalyst, who I actually think was being brilliant. I don't think he had had a stroke. I mean, he didn't. He was a very smart guy, so it was a little surprising what he was doing this. But I think what he heard something that only a gifted psychotherapist would hear, which was when I'm telling him that I'm so slow and I'm giving the explanation about the genetics and stuff, he's hearing with his third ear, he's hearing that it's not a totally sealed case. And he's wondering what's going on. Now, he didn't give a damn if I got faster or not. That was not his interest. His interest was in my increased awareness. That was always his interest. He wasn't into programming my outcomes in my life. That would happen on its own, but he was interested in, was I really taking account down to the truth level of who I am and what I think? And he got me riled up, which got me to go out and ask this guy to help me in a concrete, practical way. And so then I came into the world of therapy, always thinking, it takes both. You really need someone who's able to sort of see you as you are and help you see yourself as you are, to appreciate reality and have awareness. And you have to have somebody who can really give you in the details that you need. How do you run? How do you regulate your anger? Down to the details, not, well, just do what your brother does. No, that doesn't help me very much. That just sounds, once again, like you like my brother better, so that's not really helpful. How about if you tell me actually what to do when I get angry? What's it feel like when I get angry? What's it like in my chest? What's it like in my hands? And what does it do if I move this way, or if I think this way, or think, all these little mechanical things. I mean, we are mechanical beings. We like to think we're beyond that, but we also are just programmed applications of the brain. And so there are ways to change things. So I came thinking, you really need someone who helps you with your motivation and someone helps you with your skills. And then when I finally landed up with DBT, and I saw Marcia when I went out to Seattle and saw her teaching a skills group, I knew as soon as I saw it, oh my God, here's my dream. It's closer. Because I was so crushed about the basketball thing, I never actually did what would be my career. When people say, if you weren't a psychiatrist, what would you do? Be a little late now, but I would have wanted to be a college basketball coach. And so I get as close as I can. I mean, you guys are like a big team. My team at home is like a team. I do workshops. Even when I'm seeing a patient, they sometimes think I'm a coach. And so I think DBT brings together these two components of helping people with motivation, because you're pretty smart. You don't have to be a genius, but there's certain systematic checklists you can go through and figure out motivational problems. And then there's skills things, and the manual, as you know, is there. So that's my real introduction. Now, I want to jump forward because we have a lot to cover, and I want to tell you first, oh God, there's a picture of me. I'm looking at your thing. There's a picture of me in your thing. I didn't know it was going to be there. Oh, boy. Okay, DBT principles in the family. That's not really totally what this is about, but let me tell you what this is about. Uh-oh, this is not what you thought. It wasn't a battery problem. Probably the carburetor. I don't know what it is, but can somebody go forward with a slide? Yeah, this slide. Here's the thing. After teaching, I started teaching DBT. Well, it was 1988, I think, that I really put my inpatient program, I began to put it in place. And as Perry said, it was really the first DBT outside of Marcia's lab in Seattle. So it was really cool. I had a ton of access to her. She was so thrilled that some doctor from the East Coast who worked with Otto Kernberg and who was at Cornell University Medical Center, that is interested in her work, because she was like a little nobody at that point. She thought, somebody's interested in me. So she would get on the phone anytime, day or night, and answer any question. We'd go on for long periods of time, and we'd have a Sunday morning call a lot and just catch up with each other. And so I start putting this in place. So since then, I've been doing it, implementing it in inpatient, outpatient, day hospital, residential, partial hospital, emergency room, crisis team, prison, and forensic settings. And so lots of these different things, and then with adolescents as well as adults, and then with families as well as adolescents. So I've had a lot of chance to do it in a lot of ways. And the cool thing about DBT is it lends itself to those kind of different applications, whereas some things don't so much. And I want to convince you of why. DBT has a lot of steps in it. It has more than 85 strategies if you add them all up. Has more than 100 skills if you add them all up. It has a lot of protocols of what to do here and what to do there, right? So there's a lot of things. I mean, how are you ever going to do that? You're with somebody and you suddenly run up against a crisis or a problem. You don't stop and think, which of the 200 things I could do I do now? It's just, that's not an efficient way to think. But the more I taught, the more I realized, actually, you only have to ask a question that has 3 answers, not 200 answers. And those 3 answers boil down to what you might say the 3 dance steps of DBT. So I'm going to show you the 3 dance steps. So next time you're dancing, you can practice your DBT dance steps. So one is the dance of change. It's the dance of cognitive behavioral therapy. And it's the only step of the 3 that actually has a destination, because the other 2 are the dance of acceptance and the dance of dialectics. And if you know these 3, you can apply DBT all over the place. You can apply it to your dog if you want. You can apply it to a loaf of bread. I mean, it's just like it's just part of our equipment as human beings to have these 3 possibilities. They go in 3 different directions. Like I say, the change one, the cognitive behavioral one, is how we change things. And it has discipline. It has, like I said, the first distinguishing characteristic is it has a destination. As you'll hear, the acceptance paradigm has no destination because the destination is to be here. Dialectics has no destination. It's sort of more of a style of how do you come to grips with opposition in your life. But the change one has a destination. You know, if that tree over there is my destination, all the change thing is about is how do I get from here over there? And if I have a lot of chairs in the way, I might have to think, how am I going to do that? I might want to really get over by that tree. I really might want to get somebody to stop using substances. I really might want to get somebody to stop harming themselves or trying to kill themselves in spite of how much suffering they have. And all of that's subsumed in what I'm talking about. I might really want to get a family to have more trust of each other, if that's possible, and that's over there. So whatever the goal is, the change step looks like this. It has to have direction, destination, discipline, logic. It's linear, and it goes like this. So it's a forceful step towards, I'm going to change myself. I'm going to change my child. I'm going to change my patient. I'm going to change my life. And whatever it is, you get your eye on the prize, and you never let it go. It's your guiding star, and you keep going at it, and you figure out how to get there, because usually if anything really matters, there's going to be like a ton of obstacles in the way. So you got to get there. So this is the step for change that I mean, is this written anywhere? No, this is my idea, by the way. Don't go looking for this. My grandfather once told me he had been the world heavyweight boxing champion, and when I was old enough, I started looking it up. It was very disappointing. Oscar Swenson he was born in America, but the first year that my ancestor came from Sweden, and my grandfather said, no, Chuck, I was the heavyweight champion. He was a dairy farmer. And I said, really? Oh, that's so cool. And I'd go to school and tell people, and then I got to be like 11 or 12. I'm looking up encyclopedias. Grandpa, they don't have you in there. You're not in the list of heavyweight champions. He said, that's because I'm Swedish. You know, they have this thing against Swedes, you know. So I just don't want you to think you're going to find this anywhere else, or any other DBT teacher is probably not going to humiliate themselves the way I do. So, all right, acceptance step is just this. I have two steps that go with acceptance. This is one, opening your hands, taking a breath, and just being here with this sense of receiving reality in every pore and just accepting it. Just accepting it. And the other part of that is accepting things in other people, which amounts to a bow. So it's sort of like the wisdom of the other person. Even if the other person just did something that you wish they hadn't done, there is still somewhere in there, there's a kernel of wisdom. And you bow to it with the acceptance paradigm, and then you try to change it with the change paradigm. All right? What's the dialectical paradigm? This one's much harder for me to do, because I'm tall, I was always a little bit stiff, and because the dialectical paradigm is the opposite of, well, it isn't the opposite of tall, but it's the opposite of stiff. A short, flexible person. Gumby, actually, is really dialectical. No, the dialectical one is like, while you do this, or while you do this, you're also improvising in how you do those things. That includes this sense of coping with obstacles. So if I run into this chair, and I'm trying to get through here, and I can't make it, the chair won't let me go forward. You know, I ask my son to change, and he won't. I don't know if any of you have ever had that experience. I mean, my dog usually does what I say, but my son would not. So you get stuck here. So then you might go into the acceptance step. Oh, during which you're thinking, okay, take a breath, Charlie. Don't get too caught up in this. I mean, just relax. Okay. And now I try it again. I'm stuck again. I open my mind. And I start thinking, you know, maybe I should go to a different direction and then go around this way and do this. And then I'm over here. And then I and movement and flow. So the dance step has to be one where you're moving around, you're flexible, you have 40 different ways to solve a problem, and you're trying this and you're trying to this, you're doing extreme things, and then you're coming back to center. And so the dialectics is really the jazz, it's the improvisation of DBT. And these other two are more like, if it was jazz, are more like the sort of chord progressions and the melody. And this is like, no, you're improvising now in order to do it on the spot. And dialectics requires, it never looks the same twice. So just think of that when you think of DBT. You may have to go, if you try to learn all those skills and all those strategies, but I guarantee you, because I've taught this a lot, it boils down to these steps. And if you're with somebody and you want to do DBT, don't think, what skills should I teach them? Think, let's see, does this situation call for pushing for change? Does it call for acceptance? Or does it call for some kind of out-of-the-box or just sort of a variation on a theme and improvisation? To me, the whole workshop could be over now, because really, I sometimes have thought, what if I have a stroke like my analyst seemed to have that day, and I can't remember anything? I lose all of my knowledge of DBT. But if I remembered these three basics, and then I encountered a population of people I was trying to help, I probably would rebuild DBT, because these are the roots. These are the foundations. All right, I want you to remember that. I mean, if you take a look at my book out there, it really is about this in a much more expanded way. It's like applying this idea for 400 pages. Okay, so there's these three dance steps, and here they are: change, dialectics, and acceptance. And I've tried to boil them down, looking at all the strategies, all the skills, and what they mean. And to me, I boil them down to 5 calling them principles. You could even say steps or guidelines, whatever. I wrestled to have a word. But these are the things you do for change, and that's where we're going to start of the 3. Because basically what today consists of is going through change, having you understand it. I want to do a role play with a family that's going to suddenly appear here, and then I want to do the second segment. I want to teach the acceptance, the 5 principles, and then we're going to go back to the same family and try to do that with them. And then I'm going to do dialectics, and then we'll go back to the same family again and try to, because what I want you to get is that, you know, all of you are here because one way or another you've suffered, or you know someone who does, which means you have too, and you're looking for something. And so I want to give you something that you can remember. That's why I do all these antics, too, because people remember antics. They don't remember all that other stuff in between, I mean, unless they study it. So I want you to walk out of here knowing what these 3 directions are and something about each one. And then we'll spend a little more time in the last segment on putting it together. So I got to go quickly through these so I can get to that role play. And Christina, you got to orient me. What time? I stop. When am I stopping? Where's Christina? I'm stopping at. We got started a few minutes late. So how about if my total stopping time is like 10:20? I think it was going to be 10:15. All right. So in a few minutes' time. See, I'm still on East Coast time here. I'm trying to do math. What? 9:40 now? So, okay, I'm going to teach now for about 20 minutes, get you these 5 principles, and then the family will magically appear on the stage. I'll tell you about the story that led into the interview we're going to have, and I want to try to demonstrate it. So, all right, change. I told you something about that, and I'm saying pushing for behavioral change within the family just because I knew this was centered around helping families, which is a lot of my own work. It's just that you guys you just have nailed it. You just put it all together here, and you have people here who struggle with problems, and people who are in families struggling with those problems, and then you've got clinicians here. So it's just fabulous. So I'm giving you can take this wherever you do your thing, you know, and because this isn't family specific. In fact, I haven't directly applied it as much to families until recently. As I have to individuals, to teenagers, and to myself to some degree. So, the change. Next slide, please. All right, next slide. These are the 5 principles. So I'm trying to really narrow it down to these are the main things you need to do if you're trying to change some stubborn problem. And if any one of these is missing, you're probably not going to be quite as good at it, quite as successful. So I sort of think of these are 5 common denominators, and this really is, you're trying to, build a stone wall, and it's hard, and you want to have a beautiful stone wall. These are the 5 things. You want to learn to be a good baseball player? These are the 5 things. These aren't specific to DBT, but Linehan has put together 3 paradigms. When you put change next to acceptance and next to dialectics, it's a very potent combination. It gives you so many ways to solve because you run into problems with change. You've always got somewhere to go. All right, so there's these 5 things. I'm going to say them quickly, and we're going to then cover each of these. So, and they kind of go in order, though they wouldn't necessarily have to, but you'll see they mainly are sequential. So the first one is defining your destination. And this is not a small thing, I remember I was teaching a workshop on skills to a group of people in Washington, D.C. It was Kaiser Permanente in the Mid-Atlantic states decided they wanted DBT skills groups in every one of their facilities. So I did 10 days of training with them, totally all skills training, because they just wanted to do the skills groups. And there was this woman I was doing a kind of a role play with. She was a social worker, to identify a destination. Her destination was that she was going to be getting married soon to this man. And she really liked him, loved him, wanted to marry him. There was no question about that. We weren't figuring that one out. But there was this problem that she was having with him. And it didn't sound that bad, but it was bad for her. Her passion in life, other than meeting him, I guess, was kayaking. And she loved to go out and kayak on the weekends, especially Saturday. She had done that for years. Now she has this fiancé who's with her a lot of the week. But on Saturdays, she'd go out. He wasn't interested in kayaking, which was fine with her. But when she would come back from kayaking on Saturday and then want to be with him and do things with him that night, he wouldn't be anywhere to be found, which was unusual for him. He was easy to find. He would respond to texts immediately. She'd get back from kayaking, and he was nowhere to be found. And she'd try to reach him and couldn't reach him. Eventually, he'd show up. And it became a pattern. So she said, I wonder if I can apply DBT to this problem. I said, of course you can. There's no such thing as a problem you can't apply DBT to. So she had to name, so we had to start out with, let's name the change you'd like to see in your fiancé. It's not the only way to solve this. We could solve this by you not caring whether he's there. But let's take that one which you actually seem to want to do, which is to get him to change. And I said, so what's your destination? Be as specific as possible. And she said, I want him to respect my kayaking. Now that sounded pretty good to most people around the table, but I've done a lot of this, and I thought, wait a minute. How will you know? I mean, if he were here right now and I said, do you respect your kayaking? I bet you'd like 100 to 1. He would say, absolutely, I think it's great that she kayaks. So what do you mean? You need a behavioral answer, not he respects my kayaking. I mean, I respect lots of things that I never act on, right? So what would you really like him to do? How would he convey that he respects it? Well, he would say something. Really, that's what you want? I thought, and one of the group members said, but I thought you wanted him to be there when you get back. Well, yeah, but I think that's a lot to ask. I mean, he has his own life. Yeah, but you're about to get married. I mean, and it's an important one. You aren't asking him to be there all the time. So she narrows down, we sort of ratcheted down in a dialogue, like, what is the destination? I want him to be available within 30 minutes of the end of my kayaking so that we can get together, whether it's by phone then or not. Okay, got very specific about it. Now that allowed us to move to the other steps in a much more helpful way. But if you start out with a goal like, gee, I'd like my, I have 2 boys, they're 18 and 22 now. And if my destination with my boy is, gee, I'd like you to, at one point I had to go around with my older son which turned out really bad and then really good, because I wanted him to be a better student. Not sure any of you have ever been there trying to get your kid to do homework. Homework, Dad, I don't think we have any this week. Really? Really. That's funny. It's like the third week in a row. You don't have any homework. Yeah, well, he didn't give us anything. Yeah? Were you in class? Part of it. I thought, okay. I mean, so I'm like, you know, and if I were to, and I'm avoiding saying something more specific because I don't want to make him feel bad. But meanwhile, I'm making him feel terrible. And as I learned later, because he decided to see a therapist, he talked to the therapist, and then they dragged me in, and he let me have it with his therapist's support. And really let me have it. It's fun now to laugh at it. It was really painful at the moment to love your son as much as I did and have him hate me for making him feel bad about himself. So saying I want you to be a good student would not be a helpful destination. Saying I want you to do your homework is more specific, but is that really what I want to? Really have to think, what are you asking for? What's the change you want to see? And it has certain characteristics we're going to go into, or it should, to lend itself to real, forceful change. We try to accomplish a lot of things with our kids and with ourselves and our patients and everybody that is phrased in ways that don't help. So destination's the first thing. The second thing is you got to have a commitment to that destination. You have to have an initial commitment. And the third principle is going to be you have to have perseverance. So that initial commitment and everything behind it has to be translated into going the long haul, you know, and knowing that it's probably going to be the long haul. So don't fool yourself and then disappoint yourself by thinking that initial burst is going to do it. Like just a little concrete example. Let's say your destination is you want to get a Coke out of the Coke machine, and you know how to do it. You put $1 in, let's say it's a $1 Coke machine like they used to have. And so you put your $1 in with great commitment. You know, I'm sacrificing my $1 in order to get this Coke. And then it doesn't do anything. That's more like real life. I mean, you've put your $1 in, it doesn't do anything. You've got a destination that's very specific. You know how it's supposed to work. You don't need skills training on how to put $1 into a Coke machine. And then it doesn't come back. So there you are with, God, I want that Coke. I'm thirstier than ever right now. What do you do next is the question. So persevere. There's a lot of choices. It's funny when I started thinking of this kind of thing, I'd go sit and watch people encounter stuff that's in their way. In fact, I've set up workshop problems where people have to do something that's almost impossible to do and then sort of just see what do they draw on in themselves. Some people give up. Some people just get pissed off and turn to you. And other people keep trying to figure out how to do it, right? So the Coke machine, most people, after they put the first one in, put a second $1. All right. Now you got $2 invested, twice as much as a Coke would cost. And you could have gone to CVS and got it for like 65 cents, of course. But so there you are standing in front of the machine. Now you get emotion dysregulation. Now you got emotion dysregulation, and there you are. It's just you and the Coke machine and a little thing on the Coke machine that gives you an 800 number. And that's it. That's the whole system. If only it was all that simple. And then you're stuck. You need perseverance if you're ever going to solve this. So what does the person do then? They use acceptance. They stand back. They look at the Coke machine. They try to come down from the peak of anger so they can be more thoughtful. And then what do? They walk around and look at the back of the machine, see if there's a plug there. Now it's plugged in. Oh yeah, it has a light on the front. All right, let's see. And what do you think most people would do next? Kick it. Yes. They kick it. We all do it. It isn't like our own innovation. We're such a genius. I mean, people do this. People push it, shake it, then think, oh, I should shake it from the side, and they shake it. And it's all just still there. And then they look around to see if there's anybody who's working near there. And of course, then they assume, oh, that person's responsible for the machine, which they're not. It just goes on. So life is just like this a lot. And you need perseverance as well as a direction and your initial commitment. Then you've got to have intelligence. And I was already getting into that there because all the goal setting, all the commitment and all the perseverance in the world will not necessarily solve the problem. I've worked with a lot of people who harm themselves. And if I say, you know what, we could probably end this therapy early if you would just stop it. How about just stopping cutting yourself. Like, you're done now, as of this minute. Yeah, but I do it every day. Yeah, so you have an opportunity every day to not do it. You know, it's always there. So you can always say no. Just say no. How about that? It's like I've got a lot of destination is clear. My commitment is there. I'm coming across like, let's make this happen. And I'm sticking with this, and it's not going to work. Why isn't it going to work? Because the obstacles in the way of that obviously smart thing to do are huge. And they're historic in that person's life. And they're sitting all around. So you can't just ignore all the obstacles and the roots of the obstacles. So you have to figure it out. So this fourth step is the figure it out step. All of us, you try to fix a dripping faucet or a running toilet or something like that, you've been there. I mean, it's like you go through all these steps. You know what you want to do. You get committed to it. You're there. You stick to it. But you don't know enough. I don't know enough. I have a toilet in my office. That's why I thought this example, I think, is I have a 40-year-old man he's a very sweet guy. He gets really mad, though. He's very sensitive, and he's very prone to feeling ashamed. And he helps me with my technology in my office, in my life, because he doesn't really have much money, so we barter. And he helped me with my iPhone and my computer, after yelling at me for how poorly I take care of it. So he had to go, at the end of a session, go into my bathroom, and the toilet didn't work. He took a dump in the bathroom, and he was so embarrassed. He came out, and he said, he came into my office. He wouldn't have known if I have another patient there yet, but he just stormed in, and he said, "You've got to fix that toilet." You know, it's the perfect example of how most of us, when we're actually embarrassed, we attack other people for something, you know, sometimes for the same thing. And then I said, okay, look, this is a perfect opportunity. And I have a whiteboard in my office. I had put all the mindfulness skills up. I said, look at there. Are there any of those that would sort of help you sort of tone it down a little bit and feel a little more calm? Especially, one might be to self-validate, hey, I didn't do anything wrong. You didn't do anything wrong, right? Well, it was a pretty big dump. People take big dumps sometimes, right? I didn't say, which I wanted to say, and I would have said in my family if somebody said that, how big, you know, but I know I'm a well-trained psychotherapist, and I don't do this, right? So you got to apply intelligence, and you're going to see the steps that intelligence means. It basically means three things. You have to assess the situation, which means you have to figure out what the obstacles are being held on by. Like, what's the dynamic that you're going to have to intervene in? And second, you're going to have to come up with a formulation out of your assessment that tells you, well, what are the main things I need to change in order to change that? And then third, you're going to need to put that into a treatment plan or into a plan of intervention. I have a cousin. I love this cousin in this small town in Oregon where I grew up. He and I were buddies. I was the pitcher on our Little League baseball. He was my catcher. I was the quarterback on our flag football team in middle school, and he was my fullback who could outrun everybody. And we spent our nights at each other's. In other words, we were really close. And when my older son, decided he wanted to go to college at Oregon State University, we live in Massachusetts, and he said, "Has nothing to do with you, Dad. The school was 8 miles from where I grew up," right? So funny how people say these things. No, it has nothing to do with you, Dad. It just seems like the right school for me. So he goes to this school, and that's where my cousin lives, still, as now a grown-up. And he's like, my cousin moved in and just was very supportive. My son doesn't like school. He doesn't do that well with school. He needed support, and my cousin just came through. It was just so sweet, because we haven't had much contact for decades, just family occasions. And so then I contacted him to thank him by email, and he didn't respond. So I contacted him again. He didn't respond. It's over a year. This is over a course of a year. Persistence, perseverance. I wanted contact with him, and the more he didn't contact me, it was not going to go away from my mind. I'd wake up in the morning thinking, what happened to Lee? What did I do wrong? Did I do something wrong when I came out there and brought my son to college? And I didn't visit Lee then because I had to do a quick turnaround, and maybe he was hurt. I don't know what it was. So I'm like, I called his younger sister, who I had grown up with too, and I said, do you know what's going on? Well, Lee hasn't responded. No, he still lives there. He does email. I don't know. I can't. do you want me to talk to him about it? Absolutely not. Just leave it alone. So then I just gave up on it for quite a while, and then I wrote him last week. And I said, Lee, and I also sent him a present. I sent him maple syrup from down the street in Massachusetts, where I'm from, homegrown maple syrup. I thought he'll surely respond to that. No response. So I sent an email, and just before I came here, a couple days ago, and I flew here yesterday, and I got an email from Lee. Oh my God! I was so moved that because I wrote him saying, look, this means everything to me. It may seem ridiculous to you. I don't know, because I don't know what he's like psychologically. But I said, I'm really missed that you and I could have contact. And then he writes me. He says, I'm so sorry. You've done nothing wrong. I'm so sorry I didn't get back to you. That email address, it had a virus, and I haven't used it for a year. I've been using this other one. And so, but now they've fixed this, and I just decided now I've got both of them going. So there you go. Like, you have to figure it out. And usually you're wrong. That's what I've learned with my patients and in my life. Whatever you think is the obstacle, just have your next thought be, and I'm wrong. Got this thought, this person is drinking a lot because of, this guy I know a guy who's screwing around on being disloyal to his wife, which was not the way it used to be at all. And I'm upset about it. And I've got this theory of what it is. Well, maybe it's that you're, sex-starved in your marriage or something like that. It's not that at all, as it turns out. It was other things. It was his midlife crisis. He just thinks, am I going to go through the rest of my life and never have sex with another person? I said, that's one question you could be asking. But what about you're never going to have hair again? You're never going to do that. I mean, how about buying a Corvette the way some people do? And not ending your marriage over this. So there's a lot of possible solutions once you figure out what the problem is. So, and then there's technique. Now you know what to do. You've got a destination. You've got your commitment going. You have a plan to keep yourself on track, perseverance. You figure something out which tells you what you're going to need to do. Now the question is, do you know how to do what you need to do? Like, there's a lot of psychotherapists working with people who've had a lot of exposure to trauma, and they know that a treatment for trauma might be a really good idea, but they haven't been trained in it. So they decide to sort of go into it, and they aren't as good as the person who actually knows more about it. So there's this kind of like, you often figure out what your kid needs, what your spouse needs, what whoever it is that you're working with needs. And then you have to ask yourself, do I really know how to do it? Or am I just going to go, like when I started teaching DBT, and the doctors on my inpatient unit, nobody had done DBT there, nobody had done CBT there. It was a psychodynamically oriented hospital. And Perry was there. And the doctors would say, I already do that. Really? Where'd you learn it? Well, everything you've said so far, I do it. Really? Yeah, I change people's thoughts, and I have them do stuff, and, yeah, I do. I already do DBT. It's like, no, they were fooling themselves. They didn't know DBT, but we often think that. We think, oh, yeah, I can, and some types think they can do anything, such as psychiatrists, like that. Usually social workers, and to some degree psychologists, are willing to say, maybe I don't know how to do that, but you rarely hear a doctor say that. It's just trained out of you. Okay. Next slide, please. Probably about there. Oh, we are about there. So let me just do this one slide, and then we're going to move. And the others are pretty much, all these things, I really did the teaching, as often happens. There's all these breakout slides. I actually, when we had that one slide up, I just made most of my teaching points about the 5 things. So I'm not going to go back and do them. You've got those to take home with you and look at them. But I'd rather have it come alive in a role play. So here's the important thing about goals. I've just figured this out over time, and I've added and subtracted things, but this is my current list. You want a goal. If you're working with a patient, working with a family, working with anybody, you want a goal that is aligned with the person's ultimate goals, their life worth living goals. Like, my son says, Dad, why I don't know why I have to learn algebra. And it's very hard for me to link it to his life worth living goals. He wants to be a guide in whitewater rafting. So he said to me, "Hey, Dad, how often do you use algebra?" Good question. I said, "Well, I'm not going to be in the profession you're going to be in," which was a stupid answer, because that profession he's going to be in has no reason to use. I mean, I just didn't know what to say. I said, "Actually, almost never. I mean, maybe the basic concepts, but never." He says, "Well, then why do I have to learn it?" I said, "You'd have to learn it if you have the ultimate goal of wanting to get through school. If you don't want to get through school, you don't have to learn it." He said, "Oh, great." So you want to have it aligned with the ultimate goals. Otherwise, you're just telling somebody, "Well, because in DBT we ask you to stop cutting yourself, but I don't believe in stopping cutting myself. It's the one thing that helps me." Oh, you got to line it up somehow with the person's life worth living goals. Otherwise, you're asking them to do algebra when they actually never want to do it. Second, you want it to be clear what it is, unambiguous, specific, like, "Oh yeah, I get what you're talking about." You want it to be compelling. Specific is behaviorally specific. You want to get it down to what I was saying before. You want it to be compelling. You want it to matter. Most of my work is in the public sector, the Department of Mental Health in Massachusetts and consulting in other places. I do a lot of training out in Italy, and most of that is public sector work with people with very few resources and with passionate mental health professionals, but not very many of them. And so it's the same thing. When you get somebody to try to do something, it's got to be compelling, or you're going to run out of gas. But what I'm talking about here is you've got to feel it's compelling for you to keep hammering away at the problem. You've got to feel like it's realistic. It's within the realm of reality to do this. It isn't a pie-in-the-sky goal. And you want it to be person-centered, which is a term more in the public sector and in the concepts of recovery. And person-centered, which actually began in medical practices, is really have the patient drive the bus. Have the patient be the one who's calling the shots. Give them the tools they need, give them the education they need, and then say, "You could do this or you could do this," in the way that we all want to be treated. That's person-centered care. And finally, you want it to be collaborative as much as possible, right? So here's the situation. We're going to move right to a role play. And this role play, I'll let you guys come and be setting up while I say something about your history. We're going to set up right over here. There's a family of 2 girls and a mom and a dad. And I'm meeting with them. You each need a mic, which means you have to liberate these cords a little bit. I did with one of them. So while I explain this, Eric, if you could, those 2 cords might need a thing taken off so they can stretch out. See what I mean? Okay, so this is a family. The dad is about 50-ish. This is Eric. This is patterned after a case that I had. And Amanda is the mom, right? Here's Amanda's the mom. Moms don't like to have me say how old they are, so I'm not going to say that. And let's see, then Kelly is a person who comes in as the identified patient, so to speak, in that terminology. And again, your name is?
Annie.
Annie. And Annie is the younger sister of Kelly. And here's what happened. Kelly gets criticized by her dad a lot for quite a while. Kelly has sort of difficulty staying on track, staying on target, doing very well at what she's doing. And she has a little bit of an oppositional streak in her, which, can be put, as we've seen in the recent elections, to good use. And you could be a winner, right? And but she's a little bit that way, whereas her younger sister, Annie, is like the gold star kid. Like, she's 14 or 15, she's a good student, she's a good athlete, she's a nice kid. In other words, she's a triple threat in life. And so her poor older sister, Kelly, has to deal with this and deal with the father, who's sort of a jerk. He's always picking on Kelly about wanting her to shape up, and it's out of his love for her, trying to get her to change, but she just keeps having trouble. And here's what happened that led to this session. About 2 to 3 weeks before this, The mom was just in Kelly's room when Kelly wasn't there. Kelly had left her computer open, and the mom saw that on the screen, Kelly seemed to be working on a plan to kill her father. And the mom got quite alarmed, called the father, they called the police. The police came, Kelly got wind of this, she was in her room, she locked the door, she barricaded it, and she went out the window and ran into the woods and disappeared. And the parents, the police used a helicopter and searched for her, and within a very short time found her, took her to the hospital. She was hospitalized for about 2 weeks, and then I was asked if I would be her therapist when she came out and her psychiatrist. And so she came out, and then I saw her. But as part of my initial assessment with her, I also wanted to meet the family, especially given what had happened. So I've met with them once before, and now this is my second time. The first time we just sort of went over the nuts and bolts of things, didn't get too much into stuff. Now here's what I'm trying to demonstrate. So what I want you to do is extrapolate beyond what I really do and imagine I'm doing what I'm trying to do. You know what I mean? I've found, by the way, in role-playing and training, never, ever have I had a role play or seen a role play where you don't learn something. It just always isn't the thing you thought you were going to learn, but it's always interesting. So that's what we're going to do. And what I want to talk with the family about, I really want to get us on a change-oriented track, with the goal, getting a goal. Oh, I've got a microphone. Where we have some kind of goal. And what's tricky when working with a family is that you got 4 different characters here that might have 4 different kinds of goals for what they want to have happen. But you still use this as your centerpiece to move forward. You try to get some agreement on a goal, even if that means you're going to work with subunits of the family. Like this one wants to do this, these 3 want to do that. All right, let's just leave that dialectically in place. We don't have to resolve that right now. It may, over time, turn into a therapy that actually goes back and forth between different members, ultimately with the idea, if they all want a family to work better together, ultimately with that in mind. But the goal right now might be different. So I'm going to try to figure out with them what our goal should be. It's going to be change-oriented, so you're not going to see as much validation, as much acceptance, or as much speed, movement, and flow as if you put the whole thing together. We're going to watch that during the day, how it changes with each one. But I'm going to be a little pushy about getting this, which sometimes, you guys should react however you react. Don't figure out how to make this work. No family comes in thinking that, except for actually Annie would. She might. Annie's coming to think, I'm going to be the perfect kid. In therapy, too. Hey guys, we met last week, but let me go over, because I'm so glad you all came back. And I just want to make sure, I'm like not great with remembering names. So I just want to go over, it's Eric, right? It's good to see you again, Eric. It's Amanda, right?
Amanda, yes.
Amanda, okay, welcome back. Kelly, right?
What up, Charlie?
Yeah, good. All right, that's, oh, it's not working? This is just like her. No, this is, you start to interpret everything in light of somebody's previous reputation. Okay, and Kelly, so good, welcome back. I appreciate you came. And Annie, right? Okay, fabulous. Okay, we're done. Wasn't that fun? I'm kidding. We're not done, actually. What I want us to do now, you guys have been through, I can only imagine, probably every one of you in your own way, a period that's really been kind of hellish. Is that right?
Yes.
You too?
You bet.
It has been? Okay. I can only imagine. And I really want us to take advantage of this meeting together to figure out what we're going to do, what's the most appropriate kind of help. And so I want to ask each one of you, like if you had like a goal, a little goal or a big goal, for what you personally could imagine getting out of our meetings, and it might not be what someone else would get out of them. I'd like to hear from each of you. Like, does anyone want to go first? Like what you could get out of our meetings.
I want you to fix Kelly.
You want me to fix Kelly? Okay. Is there, and let me just ask you, Eric, if I were able to fix Kelly, because, I'll probably just go like that, and she'll be like better, right? No.
No.
But if I could fix Kelly, and whether I can fix Kelly or not, if I just settled on that, what else could you get out of this? As a person, as a dad, as just a person in the world, where are your struggles in your life?
I feel like I could continue to be a good attorney, maybe become a judge. She could get on with her life, be independent, and we could just move on.
Are you a happy attorney?
I'm very happy.
You are. So it's sort of like everything's happy except this situation with Kelly? Is that what you'd say?
There's some other things, but yeah, that's pretty much it.
All right. All right, well, I hear where you're coming from, and it sort of locks into what I heard about how things went, because, and Kelly, I can only imagine that you have your own responses to what your dad just said. And I really appreciate that you're just sitting there now and looking like you're just taking it all in, because I'd appreciate that, really, because that's him, what he just said, and I'm going to want to hear from you in a minute about what your goal would be, if any, for having meetings, okay? Amanda, what about you?
This has just been so scary for all of us, and I want to understand what happened, and
Okay.
I want to do whatever we need to do as a family so that we're never back to that place ever again. That was just so scary for all of us, and we just love our children, and we want the best for them, and
Okay, right.
whatever we need to do.
So I like that you added to something different from what Eric said, and I totally expect everyone to be different. And that's fine. It's what I would expect. And you added another thing is you'd like to understand what to do. I'm sure you do too. But you want to understand what to do, and that has to be based on understanding what happened. How did things get to this point, right?
Absolutely. It was just, again, so scary. I still feel scared every single day.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. You guys went through, from your points of view, understandably a pretty scary whole episode here. Let me ask you, Amanda, it's really interesting. Do you want to understand what happened, what has happened and led up to this, and then understand what you can do? I like that.
And I want to do whatever I can so that we're never in that scary place ever again.
Okay. But you realize, so I want you to think about the size of the bite that you're ready to bite off now in your life. Because what if talking about how things led up to this point led to very painful things in discussion? Are you ready to actually handle? Are you ready to go the long haul here? If we do this, and I'll just say, and then what happens is you learn about something you never knew about before from one of your family members, and then you think, oh, Jesus, I wish I hadn't known that, or that's really painful, or I don't know what to do about that. Are you ready for that?
I think so. Again, I'm so scared that we'll ever go back to anything even close to what we've been through over the past month. So, yeah, I think so.
You think so?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's really important, and I'm going to want to work with you a little more on that because if I was saying on a 0 to 100 scale, how confident am I in Amanda's ready to go the long haul here and hear stuff kind of no matter what comes out? You know those government investigations where they say, we're going to go until we've got it all out on the table and we see the dirty truth of it all. There may be no dirty truth of it all. It may all be on the surface here, but I just want you to think, I'd rather you be at about 90% rather than 70. I'd rather, or not be there. It's just because if you're sort of, yes, this is important to me, but if I hear a hesitation in your voice, that already tells me, like, yeah, I'm going to give it the good college try. What I want to hear from each of you with whatever goals they are, with each of you have, I want to hear, I'm going to do this.
Okay.
Or I'm ready for this, I'm going all the way.
Okay, then I'm ready to make that commitment.
You are?
Yeah.
All right. Well, then that was just, that was my motivational speech then. I just brought you to another level of motivation, right? Good. This is good. Because sometimes that is all it takes, is just being aware. You know, if you're teaching a class and there's kids in the class, and you say, hey, I want everybody to to read this and write an essay on this, and you got someone in the class who's not so good at that kind of stuff, and they say, I'll try. You know what the teacher doesn't want to hear, I'll try. They want to hear what? Okay, teacher.
We're in.
I'm going to do it. I'll write that. Come hell or high water, I will figure out a way. I'm not very good at writing, and I have dyslexia for reading. But if that's what it takes, I'll do it. And that's what I want to hear from each of you about whatever it is, because that gives us a chance to succeed. So well, you're on board. Kelly, what about you?
Well, you know, Doc, I'm kind of not really excited about setting goals.
Yeah.
The last time I expressed my feelings, I ended up getting chased by a helicopter, thrown in the hospital.
Right, right.
So I don't know
that
if
was,
I can...
That was a form of expressing your feelings, you're saying, what you did?
Well, hell yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And busted in my room, read what's on my computer, violated my privacy. I mean, I can't be pissed off at this guy. I got some reasons to be pissed off at him.
I bet you do. I bet you do. I don't like the way you did that because you put... no one knew how seriously to take the threat or the plan or what was on your computer, and I bet still nobody knows how seriously to take it. But it scared the shit out of everybody. So I wish you had done it in a different way, but you know, if you want to be angry at this guy, my guess is that you've got good reason. I don't even know about it yet, but anger almost is always justified. And I would like you to be able to sit in front of this man that they call your father and face off with him, look him in the eye, don't flinch, and I don't mean now. No, I may want you to do that pretty soon, but I don't want that, not today. We're getting on board with what are we doing here. So, yeah, but I hear you. You've got a range before you would get to that.
Dad, listen to her.
What? You're not sure about... You know what? We're not going to go there right now, but I appreciate you pointed that out to me, that your dad sort of had a reaction to that. But if I respond to every reaction right now, at this stage of things, I'll never find out, for instance, what your goals are. Did you do that just so I wouldn't ask you what your goals are? You want me to focus on your dad or not? Sort of kidding with you, Ann.
What?
I'm glad that went over your head, because it was a stupid thing to say. I say my share because I sort of like wing it sometimes. All right. So Kelly, you've got a lot to catch up with or cope with of how upset you are and how violated you feel by your mom at one stage, probably by the police. Sure, it isn't pleasant to be chased down by a helicopter and big people grab you, and by your dad with whatever it is that you're mad at him about. Well, he was part of this operation, I guess, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Would it be a goal for you? What would be a goal for you? You don't even have to have one today. It's sort of like you can let this sort of percolate. I don't want you to feel you have to sort of come up with a great goal or anything. I just appreciate you were just honest. You really were honest. Thanks. So thank you for that, okay? And then one more, Annie, could you say a little, what would your goal be for these meetings if you could get your wishes?
I really don't know.
Okay.
I just want to listen.
Okay.
Help her.
Yeah, comfort?
No, help her.
Help her. Which her?
Oh, this one.
This one. Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. She's a good sister to you? That's great. I hope you have that your whole life. That's really nice. I love that. So I appreciate that, Annie. That's a great start, because you know, every one of you is going to need the support of somebody to get down to honest brass tacks here and figure out what happened and what to do. And nobody should have to sacrifice their sort of well-being or their self-esteem to go through this. But we do want honesty to come of it, okay? All right. That's all I can model right now. It sort of captures the idea of finding out the goals, and goal setting is really important, because a lot of family work, people jump in and they seem to think they know what the goal should be, and of course there's always somebody who disagrees. And in this case, Kelly isn't so sure, but I appreciated the honesty, so I'm trying to reinforce, which is another change tactic, I'm trying to reinforce the things I want to see more of in the future. So I want to reinforce your kindness to your sister, and I want to reinforce your honesty, And I want to reinforce you for trying to set a goal and try to get you up a little in your commitment. And I'm worried about you. I'm worried about you. So probably if this were a session and we went on further, I probably would be turning to this guy. And I'll tell you why. I sort of think that family therapy is sometimes like a chess game. And in the model of chess, the king is the father in the family, if it's a heterosexual marriage. And even if it's not, there's usually one king and one queen anyway, but not always. And the queen is usually the mom, which means the king can only move one space. And psychosocially, that's often true of the father that you're working with, is they can move one space at a time, and they're barely on the board. Barely on board. The mom can move the most of anyone on the board often. They can move 10 spaces this way and that way, and they can go diagonal and straight up and down. They're like multi-potential, the mom, in the social situations compared to the dad, especially in therapy. And then you've got these guys are some, I'd figure out over time as I got to know, are they pawns, are they rooks, are they bishops? I don't know what they are. But anyway, it's like that. And here's the important thing about that analogy even so far, is that the king often can't move very far, but if you lose the king, you lose the game. And so you don't want to lose the dad. And doesn't have to be the dad. It could be reversed, or it could be one of the kids. I do not want to lose people at this stage, but it's very common to lose people at this stage. So you really have to attend not just to the goal of the family. If I said to everybody, hey, don't we all agree on a goal of that there should be no threats to safety in the family? We shouldn't have anybody have to worry about their life or about being hit or hurt. Already I'm in trouble. They're not going to come fast. I mean, it's going to just antagonize, because I haven't started out. They're going to have different reactions to that, even though on my hierarchy of goals with a family, that's my highest. If I have somebody who's abusive in a family, my highest goal before anything else is to get that down. I don't want to move on to other stuff as if that's okay. And then I have sort of a hierarchy in mind. But we're going to stop at this point and let you guys actually we're going to let Eric make one statement. Because he's just been sweating it out here, hearing all these women talking about him. What was on your mind when you're hearing the stuff that got you looking like, to Annie, like, Dad's got something to say?
I was turning away.
Use the mic.
I was turning away, being aloof, like I did not validate Kelly at all.
Right. You mean in the meeting?
Yeah, in the meeting.
Oh, you didn't want to even give her the time of day here. You didn't want to give her even face.
I didn't believe what she was saying. I just wanted to.
Yeah, right. Of course. But if you're working with a family, you don't just do what they say. I have a feeling that something's going on with this guy, but I don't want that to become the centerpiece of the agenda, because I want to tell you, as we'll get to when I talk about dialectics with a family, I do not assume that Kelly's a problem. I assume that Kelly's behavior is a problem, but that behavior is actually the family's behavior. If you're thinking systemically, that behavior is the family's behavior, and it is the family's mess to mop up together. And so it's sort of like it could go in any number of directions. I don't know what I would find in this family, but I do not want to jump on board with the identified patient being the identified patient. That is very common to do, and it's kind of like exactly often the wrong thing to do until you get further along. Now, we're going to stop at this point. I want to thank these guys for their first role play. They are just perfect. I love it. Okay. And now, just before the break, we're going to sing a song together. So get your songs out. I think they're in your thing. And I'll tell you what we're going to sing and why. These are all DBT songs. We're gonna sing the DBT as Gambler, and you can join in as much as you want. I'd love to have you join in, and especially the refrain in Gambler is very well known, and probably in Texas even more so. I was going to try to write a song to something I used to listen to Tex Ritter sing when I was a little kid growing up on a record, when they had records, and it was like the Yellow Rose of Texas, but I didn't get to it. Maybe by tomorrow. Oh, no, we aren't having it tomorrow. Forget it. Maybe by this afternoon I'll write that. I don't know. So DBT is gambler. This is a change-oriented song because the gambler is sort of in the role of a DBT consultant to someone who's in DBT therapy, as you'll hear in the song. Right? The DBT as gambler. The gambler is the gambler whose game is DBT. And so he's going to be listening to this person who just came out of their therapy session. And he wants to give them a little consultation and support. And so it's change-oriented, all right? So let's, so you guys probably know the tune of this. I'm just guessing everyone outside of New York City knows this song. And even inside New York, there's a lot of interesting country stuff. Okay, Kenny Rogers and all. Here we go. All right? Ready? All right. I'll set the pitch and everything. On a warm summer's evening, on my way back from treatment, I met up with a gambler. His game was DBT. We took turns at talking about how things were going, whether I was changing through my therapy. He said, son, I made my life out of hearing people's stories, seeing where they're stuck, and helping them to see. So if you don't mind my saying, I can see you're going nowhere. If you give me some commitment, I'll try to set you free. I knew he had me going when I gave him my commitment that I would change my life instead of waiting until I die. And the air grew very still. He sounded so irreverent, said, if you want to fix your problems, you got to look them in. Now, everybody on this, you got to know when to solve them, know when to soothe them, know when to suck it up, and know when to run. You never make no progress. Avoiding all the struggles, you got to sit down at the table and join in on the fun. Now there's another page here. Now every gambler knows that the secret to effectiveness is knowing when to validate, knowing when to fight, because every day's a good one, and every day's a bad one, and the best that you can hope for is to go to sleep each night. So when he finished speaking, he vanished into nowhere. I knew that he had dealt me some cards that I could play. Now every time I hit a wall and I think I'm going nowhere, I focus my attention on the words I heard him say. You gotta know when to solve them, know when to soothe them, know when to suck it up, and know when to run. You never make no progress. Avoiding all the struggles, gotta sit down out. Now, stand up and one more refrain. Just keep going. You gotta know when to solve them, know when to soothe them, know when to suck it up, and know when to run. You never make no progress. And all the struggles, you gotta sit down at the table and join in on the fun. All right, nice job. Okay. All right, guys, running a little late, but let's take our break, which should be how long? 15-minute break, so. Or less. Aim for 10 minutes. It'll be 15. So 11:45, we're going to get started again. Or 10, whatever. Wait a minute. East Coast time, 10:45.